how would you translate that into a coherent policy to enable, undergird a more systematic process of facilitating resettlement, and indeed addressing maybe not just resettlement, because that in a sense assumes that people want to be resettled, but this issue of northern Muslims? How do you translate that into coherent policy?
Well, there are several issues here.
Yeah.
Okay, one is that there needs to be a recognition from the part of the state that the northern Muslim resettlement needs to be different and addressed differently than the resettlement of other communities who have been displaced for shorter periods of time. And this is probably true of not just the northern Muslims, but other communities who have been displaced for longer periods. Okay, so the questions are different. You know, the access to land, the location of land, the assistance with regards to infrastructure, the assistance with regards to sort of bringing back communities who were expelled, and sort of setting the historical record straight in some sense, okay, and not kind of by default letting an injustice that occurred continue, right? So there's that. Then there are other issues, like for instance, part of the commission discussion has also been with the host community in Puttalam. Okay, now the host community argues for a recognition of the fact that a place like Puttalam is also an area affected by the conflict, because the huge influx of population to that area has not been sort of taken account of. Okay, and the kinds of services that were needed to that area and were not provided. Okay, and the huge burden on the host community has not been taken into account. And also, if indeed people do want to stay in Puttalam, then that needs to be taken into account. And in the resettlement process, that has to be part of it. But and also, there's a huge number of northern Muslims who insist on return. Okay, so facilitating that process. Now, for instance, land is a big issue. Permit land is a big issue. Okay, some people have no deeds, some people have no permits. People who did have permits, other permits have been issued for those same kinds of lands. So this huge big problem of land needs to be resolved through the establishment of a land commission or something like that. And the point of of making sure that the historical presence of Muslims in the north continues, that, like I said before, that by default it is not, the Muslims are not going to be erased out of the north by default. Okay, so these kinds of things are extremely essential. Then the other issue is the issue of reconciliation. Right? I mean, it's been 20 years since the Muslims were expelled. 20 years this October.
Exactly.
Right? So, the Tamil population in these areas do not know the Muslims who are going to come back. They don't have the memory. They don't have the sort of the memory of interaction that an earlier generation had. So, I mean, that's going to be a huge problem that needs to be mitigated, right? I mean, conflicts can
erupt. Absolutely.
So, that's a huge thing that needs to be addressed. So there are lots of issues that need to be addressed. But I think the fundamental thing is the recognition that this is a whole different problem. Yes, and that is what we are striving for.
On the issue of reconciliation, I mean, given that there's no national narrative and that the absence of war is seen as peace, and there's really very little emphasis on reconciliation writ large, the point that you made about the acknowledgement in the first instance, but also the mitigation of new conflicts that might arise from these communities who go back and then have to deal with the communal tensions that may arise in the north. Is there a specific focus of the Citizens Commission on reconciliation, or is the Commission just, in a sense, bearing witness to what is there on the ground right now?
Well, let me answer it this way. The northern Muslims, in their narrative of the expulsion, have always seen their neighbors in the north as very close to their heart.
That's very interesting. Yeah. So it comes out repeatedly, is it?
Absolutely. Right. They don't have any enmity towards their neighbors, and they even talk about the fact that it was the people who expelled them, who physically did the expulsion, were not people who knew them, and also that in fact their Tamil neighbors and friends protested and helped them. There's so many stories of that. Right. So that's the position from which these stories begin. Okay, so I think reconciliation is a huge issue, and also, I mean, even in the politics of Muslim politics per se, the northern Muslim issue and the eastern Muslim issue have been different precisely on this point. Even if there are contentious issues in the east, the northern Muslims have consistently refused to see themselves as sort of oppositional to the Tamils in the north, okay? Because they've also recognized the fact that as a extremely small, numerically small community in the north, they need to live in harmony with their neighbors. And
sorry to interrupt. But when you were saying that, it's fascinating, isn't it? 2 decades of displacement and immersion in a sense of a different socio-political context, they still feel that they are Northern Muslims. You know, there's not been that diffusion or dilution, rather, of an identity. Isn't that quite fascinating, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, there are socio-economic reasons also for this. I mean, first, of course, the expulsion experience, I mean, defines you in a certain way, so you don't let go of that memory of the place from which you were expelled, clearly. But then, the Northern Muslim identity has been tied to maintaining your registration as a Northern Muslim, okay? And also, access to rations have been decided by maintaining that. So there hasn't been any incentive to sort of relocate and find a different identity for yourself.
My other question is, have you, in the narratives that you captured, found interesting differences between the received memories of those who were born when displaced, as opposed to those actually who lived through the experience? Or in other words, is the generation that was born displaced, do they have any different outlook on their community, or on their home, what they call home? Do they not want to go back? The question is that an existing, is that an emerging tension?
Oh, it's an existing tension. It's a clear tension. I mean, in the sense that there are stories that older people tell of how wonderful it was in the north, right? But there are also instances of how the younger people only hear of how difficult it was in that same story. So now we hear, I mean, in the same meeting we hear these people saying, oh, this is this was the place, we have to go back and all of that. And then a young person gets up and says, yeah, I mean, if it was so difficult there, why do we have to go back? That kind of thing, right? But so I mean, there's a clear tension. It emerges in different ways. Some people say, okay, we want to go back, but our children are saying that they don't want to. So it's a problem. But then there's also the stories that emerge that if our families go, we will go. If our fathers make a decision, we will go. Right? So it's not a uniform position there either. Like the young people have different ideas, young people have different relationships with the local population, but there is also given I mean, in certain different communities are different, right? I mean, if you're from a particular place where the mines have not been cleared and it's not possible, it's a different story, right? But if the possibility is there and people are planning, and one member of the family has already gone and seen and all of that, then the whole sort of the energizing of that whole process is quite different. So the responses of the youth are also different. I mean, if it feels like it's very exciting to go back, it will be a different thing that we'll be engaging in, then there's some interest. I mean, I've even heard, like, say, 20-25-year-olds saying that, okay, I'm going to apply for a government job in the north. The enthusiasm, right? Who have sort of internalized that whole story of, this is our home, right? And we should go back. So it's different. Yes. So I mean, again, no uniform position saying that the youth really want to stay. No, that's not clear. There are tensions, different stories, right? But there's no clear position.
I mean, the texture that you paint here, when now the commission's work is coming to an end.
Well, the commission will complete its work by about May.
This year, 2010, and will there be a kind of like a report or something that comes out?
Yes. Well, hopefully, inshallah, we plan to release the report for the 20th anniversary of the expulsion.
Oh, by October this year then.
Yes.
Right.